Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today Joy Oliver and Chris Fulks, who are from CSRA. They're going to be speaking on job analysis. I'm Josh Isaacson. I'm the VP of Programs for PTC, and looks like we have a really packed house, so this is exciting. Who knew that job analysis was such a hot topic still? So thanks everybody for coming and joining us here for this talk. Just to give you a couple of announcements for next month, we have a workshop that's going to be Suzanne Tsakomis. Sorry if I messed up the name there, but she's going to be doing a rich media simulations and workshop, which should be really interesting. So look forward to seeing the announcement on that one. And then I know, just a sidebar announcement, I know some people are interested in hiring in here, so if you're looking, definitely network around and talk to people. I heard that floating around, so after the session is over, please network and see if you can get a new gig. Let me turn it over and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chris, do you want me to introduce you?
Sure.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Joy Oliver. I work for CSRA. I am a managing research psychologist in our strategy and performance group. We used to be SRA International, and back in the fall of 2015, we merged with CSC's public sector group. So you might have heard of us as SRA, but we are the new and hopefully improved CSRA. My coworker Chris Fulks is here in place of my coworker Christy Townsend. She had a client engagement that was a conflict last minute, so Chris is pinch hitting for her, thankfully. He's also a consultant in strategy and performance, and he mainly works in our project in career mapping for the Department of Veterans Affairs. So he's actually going to show you a demo of the site that we've built and the data in particular that we have gathered and assembled from working with VA for the last few years. He's going to show you what that looks like and how job analysis data can be used in different parts of the HR lifecycle. We titled this, with some help from some of the PTC board, the Jack of all trades, unique applications of job analysis to the federal government. I have an asterisk next to unique because, let's be honest, how much of job analysis data or techniques is really unique? But we thought if we gave it a snappy title, it would get you all here, so apparently it worked. Thanks for cooperating. Okay, I'm going to try to do two things at once. Hopefully I get this working okay. Try that one. I can also just use
it should work if it doesn't.
Okay. We'll improvise. It'll be fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, don't worry about it. Oh, now it's frozen. There we go. Okay. So I have a caveat on this presentation. This is not an advanced job analysis presentation. I don't know how familiar everybody is with job analysis. I wasn't quite sure about everybody's comfort level. And I did want to talk about all the data that is collected during the process so that everybody has, a familiar groundwork to go from when we talk about the projects that we've used job analysis data and data collection techniques in going forward. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the processes involved, the resulting data that you get, some of the impact it can have for you, and then various uses. And we're going to use a couple of examples from our work with various federal clients to talk to you about how we've used these data and techniques in different parts, like I said, of the HR lifecycle. Okay, so everybody likes to throw around the term job analysis, but in reality it's really two major parts. The job analysis part is the characteristics of the job. Now, where are you getting the characteristics of the job? You're doing some background research, you're doing field observations. I'm sure any of you who've actually done job analysis with field visits, raise your hand if you've had. You probably have some war stories of things that you've seen, and hopefully we will have a few minutes at the end to talk about those because they're usually pretty entertaining. Some focus groups can help you get some of the data that you're looking to gather when you're trying to talk about what the characteristics of the job are. And then you need to identify the critical tasks. That's primarily done in a selection environment, but you need that information in any human capital effort that you're actually going to put into place. The other part of the job analysis is really the job specification, where you're trying to determine what the characteristics are of the workers that need to perform the job. And this is where you're putting time into your knowledges, skills, abilities, and other characteristics, right? And then especially for selection, you're going to be doing linkages. You're going to be determining which knowledges, skills, abilities, other characteristics are related to those critical tasks. And in often case, you're going to then use those linkages to build your selection measures. Now, outside of selection, linkages also have a purpose. They can be useful for building certification tests, for instance. If you're developing a certification test, what you're typically going to be testing individuals in is a lot of the knowledges that are required for the critical tasks of the particular field that someone wants to be certified in. So you need to know to what extent each of those knowledges need to be tested in on that certification test. Does that make sense? The other thing you're going to want to collect in some cases, or in most cases, is ability or skill proficiency estimates. And that'll come into play a lot in selection, but it also, again, comes into play in certification test development. And often in later capital initiatives, you're talking about career pathing or even workforce planning, which we'll get into in a little bit. And again, I talked about weighting. It's particularly important when you're building selection instruments to know how much each of those KSAOs are important for conducting the critical tasks of the job, so you have content valid tests. Okay? All right. So just touching on identifying your critical tasks, a lot of times you're going to be using the interviews to refine that list. And remember the old adage, garbage in is garbage out. So you're going to want to spend as much time with your SMEs if they're available as you can. There's various ways to do that. You can have a SME workshop to try to help you identify critical tasks. We actually used that recently. And it was nice because we weren't certain that we were going to be able to find a justification for it, but the Department of Energy actually has a handbook on this methodology. It's called the tabletop method. So in some cases, you might not have access to incumbents because of what they do for a living. You might not be able to bring them in to take a survey, or what they do is so sensitive that you can't visit them in the field to administer, or they might not have access to computers for some reason. So you can bring in a sample of subject matter experts and to try to help them come to consensus on the critical tasks like you would typically do a survey. You work them through this tabletop method, which is a consensus exercise. So they'll initially give you ratings, but then you talk to them about where they have divergent ratings. And you can often get higher reliability doing that than sampling the entire field, or I should say, sampling a small portion of your incumbents. The typical task analysis scales that you're going to see to identify your critical tasks are importance, frequency, difficulty, time spent. And then there's a lot of art in how you determine what the critical tasks are. You can ask 3 different people, 5 different people how they do it, and they might tell you 5 different ways. It depends on what's going to work for them and what they know about the job. A lot of times you'll see a Z-score computed from taking averages of the different scales. It just depends on who you ask. I really haven't seen a strong argument in either way how to determine a critical task from using the scales. I've seen multiple people do it different ways. Okay, and then I talked a little bit about the linkage workshop. This is where you're going to bring in some SMEs and they're going to look at the list of knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics that you've gathered from observing the job or from doing your research or from talking to SMEs. And they're going to tell you whether that knowledge, skill, ability, or other characteristics is related to, is required to doing that particular task. And it's a pretty simple exercise. The most user-friendly form of it is that your participant just says it either is or it's not required to conduct that critical task with a 1-0 rating. And oftentimes what is most easy to do is just take a majority. That if the majority of your SMEs indicate that it's required for that critical task, then you have a link established. And those weights across the entire list of KSAOs help you then build your certification test or your battery of selection instruments. And so that's what I was talking about weighting. The proportion of critical tasks in the KSAO with links is going to indicate its priority in the selection battery. If you have, for instance, a particular ability for a job that has really heavily weighted for a number of critical tasks, you're going to want to see that tested for pretty heavily in your selection battery, right? So it's all a logical process. Your linkage results can be challenging in some jobs. In some jobs, many tasks may link to skills, facility with equipment, and in that case, proficiency is going to be acquired in on-the-job training. I worked on a job analysis years ago when I was with Humro, where we worked with Transportation Security Administration. And they were really strong and pretty long-lasting on-the-job training program. So when we were doing the job analysis data, information about proficiency required for certain skills kept coming up. But what also kept coming up is that they didn't need proficiency walking into the job. They were going to get it in on-the-job training. So what does that mean for this particular case? That's a poorly phrased question. But for this particular case, what it means is you don't have to spend a lot of time in building your selection instrument, measuring your ability to use that particular equipment. It's going to be tested later on in on-the-job training after they're already hired. So because the SME said, no, you don't have to know how to use this said X-ray machine walking in the door, we were able to say, this doesn't have to be a high priority in your selection instrument. Your on-the-job training is going to take care of that. So this is all the information that comes together that you can then use. This is just a sample. It's very generic. There's actually no information in here other than to show you what a linkage table looks like if you've never seen one. For some of you, maybe haven't seen one. But you would see your KSAs on the rows and your task or your duty area in the columns. And your SMEs just indicate whether it is or it's not required. Let's see how I'm doing on time. Okay. So in summary, all the uses of job analysis data. Most of us learn this in Intro to I/O, that it helps you determine what can be included in the selection battery, how to weight those individual predictors. If you're going to create a total score, a composite, that weighting information will tell you in some ways how to create that composite. So that's good, strong, rich information for selection. But that's not where it ends. You can create position descriptions. When you read a government in particular, position description for a government position, a lot of times they'll tell you what proportion of time is spent in a duty area. That comes right out of the job analysis data. So that's what it's useful for with respect to recruiting and selection as well. If any of you have taken certification tests or let's say something like the project management professional test, the development of that is based on the job analysis so that the people who develop that know exactly what proportion of which knowledges in the field of project management are required to be covered in that test. That's all out of job analysis. It can also help you with creating training plans. So I talked a little bit about TSA. So the information that came out of that job analysis, they knew that they didn't have to spend a lot of time initially in selecting on certain skills, but they knew those skills were important for the critical tasks. So the training plan for the on-the-job hires can come right out of that job analysis information. Performance appraisal and performance management. One of the fun ways that I'm not sure how often we get to do anymore in creating performance appraisal rating system of gathering information, and which also has a role of job analysis, is the critical incident technique, right? So we probably learned about that early on in our I/O textbook, and it's been around since probably the 50s. But that information that you gathered in critical incidents to start getting your SMEs to talk about the tasks that they do and the different performance levels required, and you're also indirectly getting KSA information, can then be useful for you in trying to build your performance appraisal, and hopefully to then lend an eye towards how you're going to manage the entire performance management system in place in your organization. For workforce planning, if you're doing competency modeling, you probably have to touch job analysis in there. And it's useful for identifying where your gaps are and what your priorities are and how you're going to address those gaps. There's a good amount of literature in the federal government from the Merit Systems Protection Board about the trainability of different concepts, of different competencies, right? So if you know you have gaps in certain areas, if you're using that resource, you can identify which competencies are going to be best addressed through training, and some that might have to come through selection, right? Some abilities, things like motivation, integrity, ethics, According to the larger scale study from Merit Systems Protection Board, they don't respond that well to traditional training programs. So theirs might be something that if job analysis data indicates is really critical for your critical task, you're going to want to select on that. So all this information piles together and integrates across the entire lifespan. And then things that we'll talk about in particular is career paths. I put a definition up there for everybody at a SHRM because I'm not sure, at least for me, career paths wasn't something that was covered in my education and not something that we spent a lot of time on, but it's something that we do now. So it's just essentially the method by which an employee can progress in their career within an organization. And from the organization's perspective, the larger process of career management, how they're going to prepare and monitor everybody's progress through the various career paths in their organization, and focusing specifically on what their needs are. Okay? Hopefully I didn't go through that too fast. Is everybody okay? Okay. So just going to talk a little bit more to focus on why this is the jack of all trades. And these are all things that I've covered, but just to talk about the information that you can get out of the job analysis data from the various techniques that then goes into different human capital or HR initiatives that we put in place. So for training and development, if you're using job analysis data, you can get your learning objectives. What do people need to know out of this training, depending on what they're going to need to know when they go back on the job. It's also quite helpful for identifying various job aids. This is a new area in instructional design, embedded performance support tools, but it's not new to us. If you think about it, it translates directly out of what we do, gathering what information or what tools they're going to need to be able to do when they get back on the job. It's a direct translation to what tools they could use when they are back on the job. And then this is just something that I think really hit home for me. When I learned about job analysis in school, it was solely with respect to organizations in what we would consider the introduction of their life cycle. Their hiring, their staffing, their recruiting, everything that goes into talent acquisition. I didn't really realize until I got on the job that this data and the techniques that we use to collect it have a role across the entire life cycle. For instance, when we talk about career maps or career pathing, we're really dealing with organizations that should hopefully be in a mature stage because they're then spending more time in their talent management and planning and individual development. And even in decline, a lot of times workforce planning is going to be used for organizations to think about reduction in force or a changing profile of what they need as an employee. Maybe because the people that they currently have on staff aren't going to meet their future needs, or they don't have the competencies to do the changing work. And this happens fairly often in some government agencies. The nature of what the employees are doing is changing, so they need to think about how they're going to use what they know about those requirements, or how they're going to collect data about what those requirements are to either acquire new employees with a different skill set, invest more money in training the people they have, potentially bring on short-term employees, and in some cases even reduce some positions or downscale some positions to better manage their workforce. So this data that we think, oh, it's job analysis, it's not that interesting. It has a role in everything that we do. And hopefully I'm the only one that thinks it's just job analysis, it's not that interesting. But then I remember, all right, it plays a role in everything that we do. Okay, so Chris is going to talk about applying how we've applied some job analytic techniques to career planning. And in doing this, he's going to actually walk through a demonstration that we have of some of our client work. Are you okay to launch that?
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Joy.
Yep.
Just making sure. Okay. Yeah. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. So as Joy mentioned, my name is Chris. And I'm going to walk you through how we really apply this to the My Career BA project, specifically the job analysis. So on the screen here, you'll see really what My Career BA is. The mission is here to provide an innovative career planning tool and resources to empower, develop, and retain high-performing employees motivated to deliver exceptional service to the veterans and their families. And so what we want to start out here with some of the data collection challenges. So we started MicroMBA about 5 years ago with the idea that we wanted to go through, look at jobs within this 360,000 employee organization and try to create something that's useful and meaningful to them. And really what we wanted to do was lay out a framework or a groundwork of what was even at VA. So many people at the Veterans Affairs did not know what jobs were there. They didn't know how to transition to other jobs. All they really knew was that they weren't really happy with the job that they had, and they thought the answer was, well, I now have to leave the Department of Veterans Affairs. And so that's really what we were trying to tackle. So some of the challenges for that, as I mentioned, 360,000 employees. That is a lot of people doing a lot of jobs across the entire United States, so large geographical area. 4 different administrations with focus area and different functions. So the VA has the Veterans Benefit Administration, Health Administration, the NCA, which is the National Cemetery Administration, and then their central office. Each one of those administrations has a different focus and different function underneath supporting our veterans. Many of these jobs, especially IT, HR, they span all of those administrations, yet they all do things slightly different. So how are we supposed to look at these jobs that span these 4 different administrations and create a cohesive single job profile? The facilities function differently. So now even within VHA, which is 90% of their workforce, there's a lot of hospitals, a lot of medical centers across the United States. Within each of these facilities, they all function slightly differently based on the size of the facility. So people within the same job, the same grade range, are going to have slightly different responsibilities. So how do we handle that? Non-uniformity of data. So the HR data that we receive, and Katie actually worked a lot on this with us a couple years ago, can attest to this. It's not always 100% accurate, and there's some areas or some fields that we knew going in more than 50% of that would be wrong, such as who's your supervisor, which is a weird one to be incorrect, but it was. Luckily, they're transitioning to HR Smart in like 3 months, so it's going to be okay once we get there. And then how we get the approval. So there was a lot of working through VA to find the subject matter experts who are doing a full-time job to take time off to work with us, to fly at the time, to fly out, to have a full-day workshop, to fly back. We had to go through the labor union supervisors, managers, to get their approval. And remember, we're trying to create a singular kind of profile for people across all of the U.S. So those were some of the challenges that we knew going into it. And so here's just some of the kind of the effort and the approach. So as I mentioned, started in 2010. We're still working today. Over the last 5 years, we've met with 568 subject matter experts, and that number is before January of this year, so we've done work this year also, to cover over 200 jobs and 55 families. And so when I say a family, it's a grouping of like jobs, so nursing might be a family. And when I say a job, it's a grouping of like positions, so like our resident nurse would be a job. And within those jobs, we have up to 5 levels, entry, mid, and senior, which would be the more technical levels that you would normally see. And then supervisors and managers, which the idea being that the supervisors and managers, we really focus on the supervision and the managerial aspects of those jobs. We try to stay away a little bit more from the technical aspects of those jobs. And that was really kind of part of the functionality of the tool also. So within those areas, we've covered about 90% of the VA workforce and 100 mission-critical applications as we recommend information over the last 5 years. So our approach has actually shifted in data collection over the last year and a half, I would say. The approach used to be identify champions in each of the administrations. They would help us identify champions within the family. They would help us identify subject matter experts that could talk confidently of the jobs. When they did span multiple administrations, we'd bring in someone from all the administrations. We'd bring them to a centralized location, or we would fly out to where they were. We would hold a full day, kind of no holds bars workshop in person, and we collect the data, bring it back, do some analysis, send it to them in a nice report, get that back, make any changes, and then meet again with the prime point of contact, make sure that we're going through all the necessary steps with our labor unions, and then we can then put the data live. Since we got all this information up on the site, we said, well, every 2-3 years, we really want to look back at it, make sure there haven't been any major changes in those families, and so how are we going to do that? So one of the big things we really focused on was making sure that we were very sensitive to the subject matter experts' times. Like I said, they are doing a full-time job supporting our veterans. We don't want to take them away from that. So we started doing virtual sessions. We recommend up to about 3 SMEs per job. Too many subject matter experts on the phone is almost impossible to manage, especially when everyone either wants to talk or doesn't want to talk. It's always one or the other. We would assign SMEs, and we would have different breakout sessions now. So opposed to having maybe 3 jobs in one room that we're really working through, we tried to isolate it a little bit more, just so when you're on the phone with us, you're actually participating and you're engaged because you know that particular job. We also would offer either 4-hour sessions to try to get everything updated, or we could break these apart, especially for some of those higher profile jobs where the individuals just don't have any more than 2-hour blocks on their daily schedule because they're managing a hospital or they're working on claims. And then we would also, we group the data in logical chunks, so we really work through the profiles from kind of top-up view down to more specific information. So I'm going to transition over to our actual site now. Oh wait, I have one more slide, don't I? Okay, I will stay here then. So this is the type of data that we collected. And if you guys have any questions as I'm talking, please feel free to ask. I know I tend to talk a little fast. So these are the data, the areas that we collected. So we have career levels, as I mentioned before. We have 5 of those, entry, mid, senior, and then supervisor, manager. And they're associated to grades and ranges. And VA has a whole host of different pay plans or pay scales that you can have. We have the occupational family description, so what is that family doing? We get more specific into that job description, so specifically what are you doing on those jobs? We then cover 3 overall main duties, so what are the 3 things you do, and then we also cover 3 duties at each career level because we want to show a growth or the difference between what an entry versus mid or a senior would be doing. We also have 10 knowledge areas, which are similar to the KSAs within competencies, but we specifically wrote them as knowledge of to create some uniformity within a site. So you have to remember that this site is for external users to look at VA and see what they have, and for internal users to say, what can I do with my job, where can I grow? So we really wanted to create something that someone can go through and say knowledge of and really understand how all of the knowledge areas kind of related to each other, opposed to trying to parcel out knowledge of, skill of, ability, compatibility to, and things like that. We also capture proficiency levels at those knowledges. We really use that for more of our back-end analysis to show gaps between different jobs. We have the education licensure, and this is for not only it's interesting to know, but when you're looking for a new job, it's really good to know if there's a positive educational requirement. Developmental experiences, which are somewhat, I think, unique to my career VA, and these are really stretch assignments for someone to take on in order to help move up to another level, or something that they can talk to their supervisors about, put on their EIDPs. Here's something that you can really focus on this next year to your career. We also show trainings, which we try to show internal trainings because VA has a lot of them, so we want to promote them. And then professional associations that they can then go to and learn more about other professionals, other organizations within, or other associations within their field to really start networking and learn what those are doing. So are there any questions to the type of data elements we collected? Jim.
I have a question about the career levels.
Yes.
So, number 1, how did you define those? And number 2, how did you develop them? We've run into this as well, and we have a lot of trouble with people correctly identifying the career level. They often move themselves up screens and executives.
Right, of course.
We find that a lot, but also, at least for the HR profession, there's a lot of departments involved. So one single person, it's really hard for someone to define their career level when they're the only person doing that job in the organization.
Great question. So to recap, our career levels, how do we define them and how do we develop them? So I think I'll start with So one of the things we really wanted to focus on for my career at VA, because like we said, 360,000 people, 4 different administrations, there's a lot of just differences of how people do this across all of VA. So we wanted to kind of step back from what they're doing and kind of create a my career at VA kind of career levels so we can kind of show some uniformity between like jobs and like positions. So that's where we started from. From there, we knew that we wanted to have a technical track where they were doing the technical work, and then we also wanted to show some supervisory track where they're now supervising the employees. And so in creating them, we chose the entry, mid, and senior to show entry is someone entering into that career field. Kind of for the first time, it gets a little tricky when you start talking about people who have to go first to an internship. Well, they're still entering into the field for the first time. We then chose mid to be that full performance level, so someone who is at the full performance of their job. And then senior is someone who is either the step in order to become a supervisor, or, and we have multiple, a different career track here, which I don't have the graphics, so it might be kind of hard to explain using just my words, or someone who has taken on additional responsibilities over that full performance in more technical or specific area where they can still progress in their career, but they don't necessarily have that supervisory work. So that's kind of what we define them as. So that to the part of your question, we have a lot of HR people with kind of a department of one, and really how do they work that out? So when we capture this information, we really capture it at the people level and not the person level, if the play of people and person makes any sense there. So we captured for what does across VA, what does the group of people within that workforce normally look like? What are the entry levels normal? What's the GS range of the entry levels? What's the GS range of those mid levels? What's the GS range of the senior levels? To get the broad view of what a progression might look like for people moving within that field. As far as the self-select yourself as executive, it's human nature, I guess. I don't know if we're going to change that. Did that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions before we hop into the tool? All right. So I don't know, I would just put this here and escape. Oh no. I think you're okay. It's just going to take.
Just blame it on me, don't worry.
All right. Wouldn't be a presentation without technical difficulties.
I actually have no idea how that happened. Everything's still plugged in.
Yeah. Is it an input? Oops. We have the TV.
So that pops back up. Okay, well, you know what we
Yeah,
brought?
let's go.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I was going to say, on that slide deck, just in case we had issues connected to the internet, we have a screenshot version of this, so we can just walk it through that way.
will that work?
Yeah, works for me.
Yeah, that's kind of
Be
odd. Sorry about that.
It's fine. All right. All right, so we're not going to get the full demo, which is fine. If you would like to go on it yourself and check it out, it's mycareerva.va.gov, and the ad is, just spell it out, like an email address. And so what we're first going to show you is our career guides area. So there's a lot on My Career at VA, and I think we've done a demo of one of these before, and that's not really what I want to do today. What I want to do is really delve into what our data elements are being used for and how people can use them to really support their career development, learn about what VA has to offer. So what you'll see here is we start off with all of the families, all the family names. One thing that we really try to do when doing this is look at VA as a whole, not VA as four administrations. We didn't categorize these in the administrations. So one reason is because we want to show that uniformity. The other reason is there's jobs in here that span administrations and how exactly would you do that. By clicking on one of those tabs, you're going to go to a family page, which you see up there on the right-hand side. That family page is going to show you the family description and then the jobs that are associated to that description, or the family name. And you also have some other really cool information on this page. We're going to show career progression there that you can enlarge and actually see kind of how your career progresses, which is actually really informative when you're thinking about, hey, I want a job. Knowing how far you can get in your career, knowing what your GS range or your pay scale is going to be, is something that you probably want to know, either in the career right now or when you want to transition into one. We show which administration you're most likely to be working in, and then also up there at the top. So from here, you can actually go into a specific job that you want to get into. Oh, wait, I should go back. And so what you'll see at first is once you go into that job, you go to another screen here, which is going to show you your job description, the 3 duties that I mentioned earlier, those 10 knowledge areas, and the positive licensure that you might need. And then if you were to scroll down on that page, you would then come across the career levels. So this particular job only has a mid-senior and supervisor career level. It can have up to 5 there, and you can see that they're little accordions. You can click on them and they move up and down. And then we end the career guides with the professional associations. This is kind of a really neat, kind of compact way to give you a really good view of what that job at VA has to offer. And one of the things I don't think I really mentioned when I was talking about this is all this information that we collect. We went through the entire job analysis process, looked at all the dates, announcements, position descriptions, competency models provided by the SMEs. We then took that and kind of used our specific stylistic approach, because this is supposed to be useful for individuals coming and trying to learn about a job that they might know nothing about. It could be an external person or an internal person. So we had a lot of audiences that think about when you're doing this. So we wrote these in a very meticulous, very specific way. And then that's when we went to the SMEs and kind of worked them through our process, making sure that we could collect this information this way so it can be actually useful to the end user. So any questions about our career guides? Okay. And so then the last thing I want to show you is our mapping tool. So the mapping tool, what this allows you to do is go in, select either the job that you're currently in, and I guess when I say job, I mean the job plus career level you're currently in, or the one that most closely resembles your current job. And then you can choose a destination where you want to go. So from here, if you were to type in or go into the engineering family, you could go in and find your job. And then you can actually say, oh, I think this one's interesting, this is interesting, this is interesting, and then you can compare them kind of side by side. Maybe you're kind of like shopping for something, comparing those jobs side by side. Once you decided what job you actually want to either take a little bit closer look at, or what job you want to continue on your career path, you can then click on that job, and it takes you to the screen over here. And what this is going to show you is the progression. So it starts with the job you're at. The next tab is going to be the next job within the progression of where you want to go to. And then nice. Okay. And so from there, you have the options to either say, I'm not actually thrilled with this progression that I have. Let me see some alternative job paths. And this works with some back-end data, and what it pulls is the most likely job that you could have from your starting point. And it gives you kind of different options. So have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Once you do determine the one that you want, the information that we try to show on the mapping tool is information that will help you make the decision on, is this something that you would like to pursue? So the knowledge areas that you need to have, the licensure, what you're actually doing on the job, the VA employment, so how many people actually work at this job, and then the trends for this. So is this job growing? Is it shrinking? So all of those are things that, as someone trying to transition to a new job or understand how they can grow within their current career, it's going to be very important to them to really understand. And I might have one more. Nope, that's all I had for slides. So any other questions about my career VA before I pass it back over to Joy? All right.
Okay, so we have less than 10 minutes.
I'm sorry about that.
No, you're fine. I'm going to go through these last couple of slides pretty quickly so that we have enough time for questions and just general discussion. So I'm going to talk just briefly, I won't go through all the slides for this section, on using job analysis techniques and data in workforce planning. Okay, so this is generally the workforce planning methodology that we use in CSRA, and this is most useful for organizations or federal agencies that are going through pretty big changes with respect to what requirements they have, and then understanding whether the employees that they have on board or that they're hoping to bring in are going to be able to help meet them define what their new requirements are. So they have to define their future workforce. And then they also have to analyze the current workforce and figure out where those gaps are. So that gap level information is coming right out of your job analysis data. This is coming from your competencies, which are just big agglomerations of knowledge, skills, abilities, other characteristics that are usually have some organizational specific context embedded in them, right? So from there, you can develop your workforce plan and solutions. You can prioritize those gaps. And some of the information that you might want to consider is gaps in competencies that don't respond well to training. And you probably want to consider how you're going to address that gap. The answer might be a changing selection model. For competencies that do respond better to training, your answer might be that you're going to spend more money on the job training programs or supplemental money for outside of the job training programs. Maybe even redesign how you onboard people and how you assign them to learn on the job. And what you really need to do, which isn't going to come right out of your job analysis data, but it's always an important part of everything we do, evaluate and revise. You need to understand how your workforce trends are going, what your performance metrics are, and adapting your workforce plan going forward. But where this starts from is an understanding of what the requirements are for the job going forward in the future, what they are now, and what skills the individuals you have in place have now. And that's going to help you with your planning and your prioritization and the different approaches you use to fill those gaps. So this is just a little bit more in depth on the methodology. The background information that we use in the analyses coming out of often strategic plans and goals are going to use the same approach that you would use in job analysis, but oftentimes, in this case, we're going to go to a level higher or two. We're going to identify which leaders to interview because those should be the individuals with the biggest insight into the strategic plan for the organization and how that changing requirement really needs to be implemented and best executed. Creating competency draft competency models, reviewing those, and then analyzing the workforce and developing some plans and solutions. I'm going to skip the next couple of slides. Yeah, just give us enough time. Okay, and then just one more area where we've used a lot of job analysis techniques. We work with instructional designers fairly often at different training academies throughout the government. Sometimes the instructional designers and those of us with an IO background, we might not be using the same words, but we really do speak the same language. And what we need to remember is that if we just talk about what we mean and we get a little bit beyond some of the jargon, we really are each other's best friend when it comes to developing and implementing and evaluating training. So some of the work that we've done specifically with instructional designers goes along with their work in what they do, which their methodology is typically the ADDIE methodology, the analysis, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. So for IOs, where we spend the most time with instructional designers is in the A, analysis, and E, evaluation. And for me personally, where I've had the most success and most enjoyable collaboration with ISDs is understanding how they approach analysis and how we approach the analysis, and understanding that they're extremely complementary. Oftentimes, they want to understand what the organization's training needs are, and where we can bring some supplementary information and a slightly different approach is understanding what the field needs. So for the people that are doing the job, beyond the training program or the academy that they're attending. And while we may have slightly different methods in gathering that information, their organizational needs assessment is slightly different from the way that we might do a training and needs analysis or a job analysis. They're extremely complementary. And then they feed right into the evaluation section where we help or partner with ISDs to determine how the knowledges and skills that are developed or are delivered, the training content that's delivered in the training should be evaluated. And we really have a good hand-in-hand relationship in that part because we have the understanding of what people are going to need walking right out of training or what they need even at entry if it's a hiring situation, if this particular training is required to be hired. Okay? And again, I think this is pretty much the biggest point that we always want to take home. This is just beyond training. Job analysis helps us mainly in determining and gathering evidence for content validity. And we all know that validity evidence is our bread and butter, no matter what we're doing. Whether it's selection, workforce planning, performance management, any of these human capital initiatives, any part of the HR life cycle, we really should have content valid initiatives that we're putting into place based on data that is a good map between what the job is, what the training content is, if we're using data in the training environment, and then that the assessment or evaluation approach matches what's required in the job. So I did want to give us enough time to have a little bit of conversation, and it looks like we have 1 minute. Do we have any more time than that?
There's some flexibility.
Okay, good.
You started late.
Okay, so I wanted to ask anybody who had raised their hand earlier that they have done job analysis if they're willing to share any of their war stories. But I really do find these incredibly fascinating. If you're not willing to share, I'll tell you one of mine. You want me to start? Okay. Was there any questions online first before I start? Okay. So a few years ago, back before I was working for CSRA, I was working with Humro, and we were doing the job analysis for Transportation Security Administration. And they took us to a pretty large airport that was a hub for people flying to Central and South America. And they wanted us to do job observations of the folks that were working at passenger screening, which also involves some baggage screening. So they said, come and look over our shoulder. We want you to see some of the stuff that goes through X-ray. I said, okay, this will be interesting. And so I saw something going through X-ray, and it was a funny color. And the officer asked me, do you know what this is? And I said, no, I'm sorry, I have no idea. And he said, it's human remains. This is an urn. And I was shocked because first of all, why would you carry on an urn? But I don't understand why he could even tell that it was an urn and what was in it. But it was just one of those things where that was so context specific, because nowhere else in the country would that have occurred. It was just where we were. And so we had to be careful about generalizing that experience and making a requirement the ability to identify materials in an urn as anything that was generalizable beyond that one location. So it speaks to the importance of your sampling plan when you're doing job analysis and the locations that you're going to. Anybody else? Go ahead.
I think oftentimes when you conducted on-sites and had conversations with SMEs or incumbents, when you're supposed to be focusing on the work they do in the task and what's necessary to do it successfully, oftentimes there may be a few incumbents that decide to turn left and complain about HR or their managers or overworked. And it's like, I'm sorry to hear that. And I'll definitely relate this to your HR contact, but you can't do it.
So the comment from the room was about how to deal with SMEs who treat a job analysis focus group as an opportunity to complain about HR and how you handle that and try to deflect so you can keep moving forward with what you're there to do. Anyone else? No other war stories? Okay. Did anybody have any questions? I did want to mention that we presented information about my career MBA. We have a large team of partners that have worked with us on this project for quite a number of years, and many of them are members of ACC. You saw a presentation in 2013 on a different aspect of the tool by folks from Federal Management Partners. One of the groups that assisted us with some of the questions that you had, Jim, about the career levels, we've gotten a lot of assistance from Forge Marsh and Matt, just helping us determine, working with them closely on how we can determine career levels by understanding the differences between the levels as well as using HRIS data. Go ahead.
I don't really have a specific story about this, but I just remember kind of doing the Lincoln's workshops that we did for a really large job analysis. I think there were 40,000 Lincoln that we were trying to make. So I just wondered if you have any stories about at what level you usually do Lincoln lists or any speed management techniques for making it really boring.
So the question, in the background of the question was, how many thousand? 40,000? 40,000 linkages that needs needed to do.
So
And
not everyone did all.
Not everyone did all of them, okay? That's one way to manage, but how to potentially manage SMEs who can get bored during that process. So I haven't had a 40,000 linkage exercise. We did have, the most that I've done is in the hundreds, but we knew on one project that we would have a task list that was over 200, and then the knowledges and skills that were in the hundreds as well, and that it was going to be pretty ugly. So what we tried to do was actually group tasks into duties and do it at the duty level. Now, there's arguments for and against that, but for the purposes of not having a linkage workshop that lasts longer than 8 hours, it seemed like the best choice. Was also the only one that we could get that agency to get behind. I don't know if that's something you've done before.
Yeah, we were trying to support a test blueprint and they wanted it so we weren't able to, but we had to push that first.
Was it a certification test? Yeah, so that makes it pretty complicated. The duty level probably isn't going to work in that. Yeah, that's tough. I do know someone who has run multiple days of 8-hour linkage workshops, and I think by day 2 she had a new baby. So I would have to ask her how she handled that.
I guess a lot of them wanted to listen to music and we
Yeah.
had to try to discourage that, but then you feel kind of evil.
You do. Sometimes they're not there by choice. They were voluntold, and that also, then they're just giving bad data. And if you don't have the time built in at the end to actually do a sanity check on your linkages, then you're in the same boat as having a bad job analysis survey where you're stuck with maybe unreliable or illogical linkages. Good times. You had a question?
Yeah, have you experienced high-level missing data and how we handle that?
So not personally, and I'm sorry that is the answer. The question was, have I experienced a high level of missing data? No, I was lucky on the last few that I've done. They were either on a software program that in the instructions we tried to enforce compliance. We didn't enforce it by making everybody answer everything, but I think in the way that the instructions were written, they thought they had to answer everything. Some of the other surveys were done in person because of the work that the incumbents do. We weren't able to get them in front of computers. So that's pretty rare, though, to nowadays to be able to spend a lot of time on site with incumbents just because of the travel costs. So what kind of missing data, like what level of missing data are you talking about?
Like on a survey
Yeah.
analysis, we kind of didn't have a high level of missing data, but people skipped questions that they didn't answering them, or who knows, but didn't answer certain questions. So
Yeah. I guess I'll throw it back to the room. Has anybody else helped with that? No? Go ahead.
We had like a whole internal. Yeah, so we had a lot of discussion about that because we had a survey where you had to force answers.
Okay.
But people would drop out at various points.
Okay.
So we went from kind of the most extreme where we talked about, okay, well, if they didn't finish the full survey in 10 minutes, then we're not going to include that.
Oh.
It's like, okay, that's probably too extreme.
Yeah.
So some people in our office question were included for that particular question. So your insights are different.
Okay.
For your data. Okay. What we ended up doing with that one, we actually, they didn't answer an entire section, then we removed them for that section. So the competencies, they all had the same all the competencies. But really the reason we did that was because of the higher response rates and the luxury of doing that. We have like an 8% response rates for a job analysis survey, which is pretty rare. So for another occupation, we have like a 13% response rate. So that person would get one response, right? Really have that much movement. We have like a lot of different data. I think there's a lot to different things.
So the answer in the room, and hopefully I'll get this paraphrasing correct, is it depends on your overall response rate on the survey, what methodology you're going to choose, whether you retain somebody who's only answered a small portion of items, or if you're lucky enough to have a large response rate, you'll retain only people who completed an entire section. From a more, I guess, psychometric perspective, you can also just do reliability estimates on the sample size needed to kind of even out your reliability based on your whatever percentage you're most comfortable with, and where your reliability starts to hit asymptote, you just decide that this is good enough. We're okay with that. But that's a little more science and a little less art, so it just depends on what you're most comfortable with. And when you have a 13% response rate, then you have to marry those two up really well, because that makes things more challenging, especially if it's for something in selection or certification test development. Any other comments, questions? Did you get what you paid for? I hope so. I really am so pleased that so many people came out to talk about job analysis. Shocked and I'm going to let Josh wrap up, and hopefully we can talk to you all again next time.
Thank you, Joy. That was great. Thanks, everybody. So I just had a quick note. I think earlier on I said that next month we were doing the workshop, but actually that's in June. So next month we're actually doing an honorary session, kind of a unique session for Jim Oots. And so we're going to be having, I think, Eric Dunleavy, Ryan O'Leary, and Paul Hames is going to come. And they're going to do a panel session on some legal updates and some of the areas that Jim's passionate about, adverse impact, and that sort of thing. So I definitely encourage you to come for that. It'll be nice to kind of honor him and the work that he's done in his career. And with that, I thank you again, and please enjoy. Take food, network. There are people that are looking for jobs or to hire people. So, all right, thanks everybody.